don't think we've got the music. Let's try it. Every day with Jesus is sweeter than the day before. Every day with Jesus, I love him more and more. Jesus saves and keeps me, and he's the one I'm waiting for. Every day with Jesus is sweeter than the day before. I haven't sung that in a long time, Gabby. Good suggestion. How many of you knew that as you sang it? Just a couple? Let's do it again since that's kind of a new one. All right, one more time. Every day with Jesus is sweeter than the day before. Every day with Jesus, I love him more and more. Jesus saves and keeps me, and he's the one I'm waiting for. Every day with Jesus is sweeter than the day before. Do we have one more?
Not quite a time yet.
How about a little bit of obedience?
Sure.
Sound good?
Wait, to stand up and sit down though, guys.
Yeah, we'll do sit down first and we'll stand up on the O. All right, here we go. Obedience is the very best way to show that you believe. Doing exactly what the Lord commands, doing it happily. Action is the key, do it immediately. Joy you will receive. Obedience is the very best way to show that you believe, and spell it O-B-E-D-I-E-N-C-E. Obedience is the very best way to show that you believe. Second verse. We want to live pure, we want to live clean, we want to do our best, sweetly submitting to authority, leaving to God the rest, walking in the light, keeping our attitude right, on the narrow way, for if we leave the word we receive, we always will obey, and we spell it O-B-E-D-I-E-N-C-E. Obedience is the very best way to show that you believe. Very good. I'll have Mr. Guyman come up here in just a second. Can I ask you guys a favor? Since I have some pictures and I have a board, I'm wondering if you guys could consolidate this direction. Would you be willing to do that a little bit? Would that be okay? Could girls, one of you scoot over a chair? Boys, could you just kind of fill in this direction?
Yeah, leave your chairs where they're at.
Yeah. I just want you to be able to see the board and see my pictures a little bit better, and I feel like you're way over in distant land over there.
Distant land?
Distant land. Distant land.
You're fine.
Distant land. Distant land. Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much.
The board?
All right, Mr. Gardner.
All right. Test your memories today. Mr. Cooper taught last week. Which book of the Bible did he teach from? Raise your hand. Yes.
Malachi,
Which is?
the last book of the Old Testament.
Last book of the Old Testament. Was Malachi a king, a priest, a prophet, or another leader? Yes.
Oh, me?
Yeah. Asa,
He was God's messenger.
which we call
A prophet.
prophet. Yes, he was a prophet. And he prophesied about two things. Remember, Mr. Cooper told you that. What were the two things he prophesied about? One was something going on, and one was something that'll go on in the future. Are you Doing exercises or your hand up?
Hand up.
Okay.
What if
Give me one of them.
repent and turn back to God?
Repent and turn back to God. There was some particular, though, they were doing wrong. Remember, Mr. Cooper had the gifts. Does that help you remember? Morgan woke up.
Giving bad gifts to God.
What kind of bad gifts were they?
The oldest and daddiest, like goats and
Yeah, when they brought in their sacrifices to the temple, they brought the worst of the animals instead of the best. That was the one thing he prophesied about. And then he did something that was going to happen in his future. It's now in our past. And what was that? Morgan thinks she knows. She just answered one. Levi was reaching up and then he stopped to itch his nose.
that Jesus was born.
Not quite Jesus.
Oh!
Oh,
Oh.
yes, sir.
John the Baptist?
John the Baptist. Now, we gotta make sure we understand this. Carson made it. I thought he might be homesick. We're all on this side today, Carson, so, yeah.
Oh, Carson, right here.
I put it out in the hall, Seth. Yep. So who was John the Baptist? Anybody remember? Can you tell me? Yes.
Jesus' cousin.
Jesus' cousin. That's true. And because he was his cousin, he had a special job. You know, you had your hand up.
Prepare the way for Jesus.
Prepare the way for Jesus. He went before Jesus started preaching and was preaching about the kingdom of heaven. And here, good old Malachi knew that a good 400 years before it happened. So now, Mrs. Gay has the lesson that comes after this, but before the New Testament. How's that going to work? We'll see what she has to say. All right?
So this is the 400 years of waiting, as you can see on the screen. So I guess we all just need to sit here. 400 years. This is going to take a long time. Okay, maybe we won't do that the whole time. But this is 400 years of waiting. Before we get into the 400 years, I want to talk about all the way back to the beginning. Because these lessons are chronological. Somebody tell me what chronological means. From where we started, they're chronological. So what's chronological?
Me and Micah both know it means in the exact time.
Exactly, in the time order, right? Okay, so all of these stories that we talk about and other stories that you hear and other lessons and church service and all that, it's important so that you understand where they fall in the Bible. Not just a random story here and there and here and there and what does this go with and when was this and I don't know. It makes more sense when you know when it comes in the Bible, right? So let's go back and kind of give an overview of our Old Testament. Since this is the end of the Old Testament, let's talk about what has happened all the way through the Old Testament. Right here, about 4,000. And by the way, this is not like exact years. Like what happened here didn't happen in 2500 BC. These are very rough estimates, very rough. Because I want you to get an overall picture of where things line up, and that's the point today. Okay, so somebody tell me what's here. Micah?
Adam and Eve were made.
Yep, I'll just call it creation. Adam and Eve. Okay? This is the biggest gap we've got in everything we're doing today right here, and this happens in 7 chapters of the Bible. What happens here at 2500 BC?
Noah's Ark.
Yeah, here's the flood, okay? So that's 1,500 years, and this is where we've got the whole list of generations in the Bible, and it goes, this person had this person, had this person, had this person, and there's a whole lot of time. And then we're going to skip over here to 2000 BC, 500 years later, or so. Gabby, what do you think?
Abraham?
You guys are so smart.
Because they can tell because the paper is
1500 BC. This is actually 1446. This is one that they kind of pinpointed the date on a little bit more clearly. Levi.
Isaac. Or
Not quite.
Abraham's son.
A little bit later actually, because Abraham's son, if he's in 2000, Abraham's son would be not quite that far, right? Do you have another guess? That's okay. Chad?
Daniel.
Nope.
And Solomon.
Not Daniel. That's a little bit later. Micah?
Oh wait, never mind.
Maybe what's the next big event that would happen? I better keep moving a little faster. Okay, I'm going to say it. This is the Exodus, or Moses, and in Egypt. Remember when they're coming out. So let's just say Moses, because I think that'll make the most sense to you. Okay, here then, after we get started and Israel gets going, this period right here, there's 3 periods that we've talked about kind of recently. We're going to start off with the Judges. All those fun stories about weird people and doing crazy things, and some of my favorite Bible stories in there. Who happens after the Judges? What period of Israel's history happens after the Judges?
Oh,
Uh-huh.
they're in captivity.
Not yet. That's coming.
They want kings.
The kings, okay? They wanted a king, and so here we've got all the kings of Israel. And then Asa said, here is the captivity. I'm going to call this,
Jail.
yeah,
Jail.
that's a good name. Captivity. You may not be able to see that very well.
Or jail.
And then this is
Silence.
called the silent years. And that's kind of what we're talking about today. But how, my question is, how do the books of the Bible fit into our timeline? Let's take a look. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Genesis is probably where most, I would say the majority of the stories you hear about in the Old Testament come from, because we go all the way from creation all the way to Joseph. All right, and that happens all the way to here, somewhere in here. This is Genesis right here, okay? Exodus, right there. It's little, because that talks about Egypt and then coming out and then starting to wander in the wilderness, all right? Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, that all happens right there, okay? Because it's the establishment of the nation of what?
Israel.
Israel, which is the main focal point of the whole Bible, is Israel, right? So those 5 books are establishing what Israel is going to be like, what the rules are, the tabernacle, all of that. Okay, then Joshua is right after here, and he is going into the land of Israel, conquering, getting it ready for Israel to live in. And then we've got the Judges, all those fun stories. Then we've got the Kings, and I'm going to put in that First and Second Chronicles. They're parallel,
But
meaning
what about First and Second Kings?
that's the Kings. Sorry. Yeah, First and Second Kings and First and Second Chronicles are roughly parallel. They're telling the same stories during the same portion of history. Again, this is a rough estimate, okay? And then, what do we have next? Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. When do those happen?
Captivity.
No?
Coming out.
Those happen during,
King.
well, right after the captivity and then some in the captivity, okay? So these are kind of after, kind of in here somewhere, all right? But then, do we keep going in chronological orders? So far it's been fairly chronological, but where do these come?
And
In
the
a
years of silence.
No?
After the sign.
Job is kind of a,
We don't know where it is.
Difficult.
The story of Job.
who wrote Psalms? Who wrote Proverbs?
David.
Who wrote Song of Solomon?
Solomon.
You are so good. Okay. This is during the portion of David and Solomon. Okay, so we're going back here to Kings. That's where they come from. So at this point, we're kind of leaving our trade. The Bible is categorized by type of book, not so much chronological order. Okay, so then we go down here to Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentation, Ezekiel, Daniel. These are all what?
Captivity.
Mostly captivity, but
Major prophets.
yes, these are, good job, these are the major prophets, and as we go through these are going to come in the time of the kings and through the captivity, and these are all prophets telling what God said for them to tell to Israel, so that the people of Israel will understand what they're doing wrong and how to fix it. Okay, so does that make sense? Where all these fall in, we don't start at the beginning and go to the end necessarily. They're sectioned by category. Okay, so let's start talking about, Mr. Guyman reviewed Malachi's message, right? The warning to the priest about the offering, and then the hope of Messiah and the messenger. There was last week's picture, you can see it. Is that a good angle? Can you guys see that?
Yeah.
Does that work?
I can see it.
Kinda, sorta? But for our silent years, which we're talking about today, we have to go back to Daniel. Huh? Wait, where was Daniel?
In captivity.
No, he's in
Yeah.
Kings.
He was actually in the captivity because Daniel lived in Babylon. And remember, Assyria took the northern kingdom, Babylon took the southern kingdom. They made them captive and they took them to their nations, and that's where Daniel lived, was in Babylon. But wait a minute, I thought we were talking about here. Why are we going back to the book of Daniel? What was Daniel? He was a,
King.
not a king, he was a prophet. What do prophets do?
I was gonna have messenger.
They tell what's going to happen. Okay? Daniel is telling what's happened here in the silent years. Isn't that cool? God told him what was going to happen so that they could be prepared. And not only is there a prophecy, there's an interpretation of the prophecy in the book of Daniel. There's not a lot of times that God specifically interprets what he meant by the prophecies, but he did in the book of Daniel, and that's what we're talking about today. Okay, who can tell me a couple things that you remember from Daniel's life? Let's remind ourselves who Daniel is. Daniel, some of these stories are very, very well known. Micah?
Daniel and the lions.
Daniel in the lion's den. I knew you'd say that first, so I put it first in my pictures. Okay. Something else that happened with Daniel. Levi?
He was a shepherd.
He was a shepherd. That was David. That's a good
Daniel
thought.
and the
David and Daniel are
shepherd's
easy to
den.
get mixed up. David was the shepherd and he became the king. Daniel, as far as I know, wasn't a shepherd, but, you know, who knows? They had sheep.
Daniel and the shepherds.
Wasn't he Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's friend?
Yes, he was. They went to Babylon together, yep, and that was the whole fiery furnace thing. Daniel was not in the fiery furnace, but he was friends of those guys. Carson.
Writing on the wall?
Ooh, that's next. Look there, writing on the wall, the mene tekel upsarim thing. Yeah, and then that king got that night.
Yeah.
Can you think of something else?
Actually pronounce minimal tekel your farce.
Thank you very much. I should have called on you first. I don't have my pronunciations done very good on that one. Okay, good. So this is what Daniel is, and at some point, Daniel had a vision of something interesting. Now I'm going to draw. Can I erase the temple?
Yeah.
Is that okay, Chad? I'm sorry.
It's fine.
I wouldn't if I didn't need the board.
I thought that was a giant mouse trap.
Okay, so
It did.
Mary is going to read for me the portion out of Daniel very slowly, and I'm going to draw it. This is not going to be pretty, but it's going to be fun. Okay, I'm about the worst drawer you might ever see. This could be kindergarten level. Here we go.
Okay, so this is from Daniel chapter 8. Okay. I raised my eyes and saw, and behold, a ram standing on the bank of the canal. It had 2 horns, and both horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher one came up last.
Okay, so it was a ram, and he was standing by the canal. Remember, this is a vision from God, okay? This isn't something he's seeing with his eyes. It's God is giving him this vision, okay? Here's this ram. Okay, here we go.
I would like to draw it.
There's the ram. Isn't he cute?
Yep.
That's a ram.
I'm not done yet.
It looks like a giant animal cracker.
Okay, and it said there were 2 horns. One came up first, and the other came up, but it was bigger than the first one.
Ram's horns don't look like that.
I told you it wasn't going to be
You got
pretty.
spiky hair.
It's a dinosaur.
Okay. Thank you.
It looks like a rhinoceros.
It looks like a dino.
It looks like a rhinoceros.
Yes, please.
I saw the ram charging westward and northward and southward.
Just draw a circle.
No beast could stand before him, and there was no one who could rescue from his power. He did as he pleased, and he became great.
Okay, so he's pretty big. He's great.
Okay.
As I was considering, behold, a male goat, not a ram,
It's going to look the same as the ram, I'm just letting you know.
came from the west across the face of the whole earth without touching the ground.
A
And the
floating
goat
goat.
had a conspicuous horn between his eyes. You guys know what conspicuous means?
No.
means you can really see it good, okay?
It's a unigoat.
Conspicuous horn, conspicuous horn between his eyes.
That looks exactly like the same one.
I told you it would.
Looks pretty good.
Okay, conspicuous, so it's going to be pretty obvious. It came from the west. I should have had him facing this way, but that's okay.
Yeah, it was between his eyes.
I'm only showing one eye. How am I supposed to do that? Okay. Thank you.
On his
He
nose.
Listen, he came to the ram with the two horns, which I'd seen standing on the bank of the canal, and he ran at him in his powerful wrath.
I'm not drawing that. Imagine. Imagination.
Just draw the lines.
Okay,
Just draw an
coming.
arrow at him. Right, there we go. Then draw a little kaboom. No.
Okay.
I saw
Right,
him come close to the ram, and he was enraged against him, and he struck the ram, and he broke his two horns. And the ram had no power to stand before him, but he cast him down to the ground, and he trampled on him. And there was no one who could rescue the ram from his power.
So the ram went kaput. Okay, he's dead.
Put an X over his eyes.
Oh, okay, that's a good point. That's a good point. There we go. I like that. Okay.
Then the goat became exceedingly great, but when he was strong, the great horn was broken, and instead of it, there came up from 4 conspicuous horns towards the 4 winds of heaven.
Only because I read out a room on his head. Okay, keep going.
Okay. Out of one of them came a little horn, which grew exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the glorious land.
Yeah.
It grew great even to the host of heaven, and some of the host and some of the stars it threw down to the ground and trampled on them.
I don't think.
It became great, even as great as the prince of the host. And the regular burnt offering was taken away from him, and the place of his sanctuary was overthrown.
Yeah.
And a host will be given over to it together with the regular burnt offering because of transgression. And it will be thrown, and it will throw truth to the ground, and it will act and prosper.
Write truth under its feet.
Oh, that's a good idea. Truth.
Yeah, it'll throw truth to the ground, okay? Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to the one who spoke, "For how long is the vision concerning the regular burnt offering, the transgression that makes desolate, and the giving over of the sanctuary and host to be trampled underfoot?"
One more. Yes.
And he said to me, "For 2,300 evenings, 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the sanctuary shall be restored to the rightful state."
So let's talk about what this means. Isn't that a fun story?
That's kind of creepy.
It kind of is.
Because
I
the
would
ram
agree.
looks like a dinosaur and the goat looks like
I did my
a
best.
bunny.
That is my
It
best.
does look like a bunny.
Okay,
It does
so
look
let's
like a
talk.
bunny.
Let's talk about what it means now. Okay. This is the interpretation that is the next part of this book of Daniel, Daniel chapter 8. Okay, the first guy. This is
And a tail.
these are the Medes and the Persians. Okay, so here in captivity is where they started. This is Media, and this is Persia.
Bird looks bigger.
Okay, these were big nations that took over from the Babylons and such, and they became really big. Persia was where Esther lived, right? Persia was where Esther lived, and they were the big nations. They took over things that were going on. Okay, but then the Greeks came. And the Bible says specifically who these are. The Greeks came, and they took over, and there was one horn that grew really big, okay? You're going to know this name. The Bible doesn't say this name, but this is who came out of that Greek Empire that took over a whole bunch of land, and he's very, very famous. Carson, do you know who?
Rome.
Rome is next, but I'm looking for a person, a Greek person that took over lots of territory.
Alexander the Great.
Oh, yes! Thanks. Alexander the Great came in here. He conquered Media, Persia, and a whole bunch of other stuff. He had lots of land, all right? And then Alexander the Great lived for a while, but then he died, as people tend to do.
And
And he had 4 generals. And instead of giving over his kingdom to sons, like a lot of times happens with kings, he gave them to his 4 generals, and they each had a section of this land of Greece, what has become Greece. These 4 guys, okay? But there was one in particular that came up here, and his name is, I gotta spell it right, hang on.
I forget his name, but he ruled Alexandria.
His name is,
His name is.
And the winner is.
Antiochus Epiphanes. Oh, would you like that one?
And he founded Rome.
Antiochus Epiphanes. Now, Antiochus Epiphanes was over the land of Judea. And in Judea, there was the temple and all those kinds of things, and the Jews were still trying to practice their religion, or the Jewish religion. Remember, this would be around right here. This would be getting pretty close, 1,500 or 150 or something like in that, okay? And in that time period, he came in and he started to desecrate the temple. He made a mess of things. He started sacrificing pigs on the altar, which was really, really bad because the Jewish people couldn't even eat pork, okay? So that was an unclean animal, and he did all kinds of things. So there was a man named Mattathias, and his son Maccabee. And they said, no more, we're going to get this guy out of here, and they put up a revolt. Maccabees went in, and they conquered him, and they got him out of the temple. And all of that story happens, we read about it in the book of Maccabees, which is not in the Bible, but it's a historical book. And they won, and they got him out of the temple, and that time period is why the Jewish celebrate, everybody know? What do the Jews celebrate for this time period when they cleansed the temple and got rid of Antiochus? Hanukkah. That's where Hanukkah comes from. You guys heard of Hanukkah?
Yeah, just
You hear that, right? And there was something about the lamp that stayed lit for a lot of days, day after day after day, and they considered that a miracle. But that's where Hanukkah came from. And then eventually, of course, well, Alexander died, but this is a good example how God uses some bad things to create good. All right, think about the Greece. Think about how big Greece became. What happens when one nation spreads over a whole bunch of area?
It starts to keep
What-
together.
what-
It starts to break up.
Well, it often does, yeah, over time. But that language is going to spread all the way through the land, right? And so all these people in this whole area are going to be speaking Greek. What language was the Bible written in the Old Testament?
Hebrew,
What language is the Bible written in the New Testament?
Greek.
Yeah, okay? And so all these people understand Greek. And do you see how the gospel, God's setting up so the gospel can spread more with that one language of Greece in this big area? Now it goes beyond that,
Oh.
but that's where the Greek language from the New Testament came from.
There's
All right.
2,020 years of silence.
So one thing that happened, one thing that happened during this time period were some Jewish leaders called the Sadducees and the Pharisees. You guys hear about that in the New Testament in the stories about Jesus. The Sadducees and the Pharisees were 2 groups of Jewish leaders who believed very different things. The Sadducees wanted the help of the Greek people. They thought they would help. They believed only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. They didn't believe that all of this was scripture, and they rejected it, okay? The Pharisees wanted to separate themselves from the Greeks, but they believed all of the law and the prophets. They were paying attention to that and believed that to be from God. They also did some other things that you hear about in Jesus' stories, about how as they would try to stay true to the scripture, they wanted to stay far away from sin. And so here's God's laws and here's sin to keep them from sin, but they added this law, and then they added this law and this law to keep further and further away from sin, but then they called their laws the same as God's, and they made them as strong, and they told people that they were as important as God's laws. And so Jesus, when he finally comes here, Jesus says, that's not right. You need to make sure that you're following God's laws and not man-made laws. So that's where the Sadducees and the Pharisees came from. I think I have a, oh, no I don't. Okay, then let's talk a little bit about the Roman rule, because after all of this, the Greeks got weaker and weaker and weaker. These kinds of things happen, you know, in phases. Things last a long time, hundreds and hundreds of years, but then another group will get stronger, and that happened to be the Romans, and that would have happened only about 70 years before Jesus came. Here's the Roman rule. Sadducees and Pharisees were still fighting against each other, but they said, ooh, here's a strong people. I'm going to go to them and try to get them on my side to fight against the other group. So Sadducees wanted to get the Romans to fight against the Pharisees. The Pharisees wanted to get the Romans to fight against the Sadducees. They were constantly in battle, and there was a certain man, a Roman general named Pompey, I think I'm saying it right. Pompey. The general named Pompey. And he listened to the both sides, and you know what he did? He came in and conquered everybody.
Right.
He just said, I'm coming in and I'm taking over Jerusalem and a whole bunch of other area, okay? But he came in and he took over Jerusalem, and Caesar, at that point, Caesar would have been the king of Rome, because Caesar is just another word for king, basically. So there's a whole bunch of Caesars in Rome, okay? Anybody remember what the name of the Caesar was when Jesus was born? Chad?
Augustus.
Caesar Augustus, and those are in the verses we memorize at Christmas time. Well, Caesar appointed a certain man to be ruler over the Judea area. And his name was Herod the Great. He wasn't great because he was all that good of a guy. He was great because he built a bunch of neat stuff. That's why they call him Herod the Great. And that is where our story comes in. Oops, the Roman rule. That's where our story comes in with the wise men coming to Herod and telling him about Jesus, and then Herod getting jealous, and then Herod saying to the wise men, come and tell me where he's at, and then Jesus doesn't, but Mary and Joseph run with Jesus to Egypt, and then what does Herod the Great do to try to get rid of Jesus? Somebody else? Anybody else? Something awful that I can't even imagine. Do you remember, Morgan? Oh.
Kill all the baby boys.
Killed the babies under 2 years old. That's what Herod did. He wasn't such a great guy, was he? No. But that's what he did. All those people, and that's prophesied about the mourning that would happen in that time period. So again, God uses the bad things. There's a lot of bad stuff going on here in these silent years with the Greeks to the Romans. But the Romans, where the Greeks spread their language, what did the Romans do? The Romans were very, very famous for building roads and building ports, ship ports. And as the gospel spreads, don't you suppose those roads and those ports and those ships were used to spread the gospel? God can take something that's bad and make it very good. God is powerful over all. Can anybody tell me the characteristic of God, the word that means God is over all, has complete control over everything? It's a big word, but it's a good one to know. Anybody else that hasn't answered like every other question? Anybody starts with an S? Micah. Sovereign. God is sovereign. And God takes good and bad things, but he turns it out exactly the way he wants it to turn out. So, my last thing I want to show you, what does the entire Old Testament, all these books of the Old Testament that we've studied for the last couple years, all these Old Testament books are aiming towards what? What do they point towards? What is the focal point of this whole part?
The T on your thumbnail.
Yeah, and it's not a T, it's a cross, right? Because it stands for Jesus. All of this points to Christ. All the sacrifices, their salvation, which they wouldn't have called it salvation, but that the way they were made right before God is looking forward, looking to the Messiah that was to come. They weren't made right by their sacrifices. Their sins didn't go away by their sacrifices, even though God told them to do it. They were made righteous before God because they were looking and believing of the Messiah to come. What about here? I didn't write anything in here.
That's
Lots of stuff happened here and here now.
That's 2020 years of silence.
Very silent. Okay, we're actually going to start next week. Next week is review. The week after that, we'll start talking about this time period right here, because this is Jesus, right in here. Okay, but how do we have salvation? How are we saved from our sins and made right with God? Levi?
Accepting Jesus as our Savior.
Yeah, we're looking back. We're looking back to Jesus right here. This is what the Bible is all about. And don't forget, that is the focal point of the Bible, is Jesus coming down, dying, paying for the sins of these people and these people. That's where we're at. And that's kind of right here, right before we start all of this. Well, actually, at the end of those 4, but it's fine. All right, I would like you guys to hop up, make a big old circle all the way around the room.
Ooh. Alright. How do we do that?
Spread all the way around. You can figure it out. Go all the way around. Spread all the way around.
Wait, that's too much. Circle. Whatever your name is.
You can have somebody back there against that wall over there. You can have somebody up here. Grayson, why don't you come up here just to spread out? Come on.
Race to the chicken.
And Chad, why don't you come right here in front of the podium?
I'm throwing balls around.
Let's go.
Now, the rules of my review game with the ball
Can I chuck it at
are
someone?
that you cannot chuck it at someone. That is my rule. Thank you for the good segue into this. You're tossing it from one person to the other because I'm closing my eyes and saying stop. And whoever's holding the ball gets to answer my question. Okay? So I'm going to start with you, Micah. Going in the circle.
Hi, camera.
Okay, watch for the ball so you can be ready to...
But I'm so famous. I'm on TV.
Hey, you missed Gabby.
Asa, grab the ball.
Asa, how long were the silent years with no prophecies?
400.
400. Good. Keep them under.
400 years.
Wow. You're good.
Listen, you guys.
Hayden.
Hayden, why were the silent years called the silent years? What was silent about them?
I don't.
That's okay. Carson, what was silent about the silent years?
What happened?
Nothing. What do you mean nothing? Because I told you all kinds of things had happened. What didn't happen? And I'm not sure I covered this well enough that I should have, so I'm asking the question now. Shh.
Wasn't it that not?
Hang on. Give him a chance. Do you know? What didn't happen? Lots of history happened. But what didn't happen? What made it silent? Chad?
There's no books of the Bible written about it.
Meaning there were no New Testaments?
Books.
Looking for a word.
Prophets.
Prophets or prophecies. Yes, there was no new prophecies given by God. God was very quiet. And by the way, the very next time that we hear from God directly is the angel Gabriel coming to Joseph and Mary. That was the first time in 400 years. Do you suppose that was significant to them?
Yes.
Oh yeah, that was significant. Okay, thank you. Pass it.
So, don't do it yet. Gabby dropped it.
Gabby!
I dropped it.
That's okay. That means you're extra lucky to get the question.
You should have grabbed it.
Okay, what are my 2 animals, since you can clearly tell from my drawing?
Ram and a goat.
Very good.
Spinosaurus and a rat.
Stop it.
Micah, what great nation was the goat?
Greek.
Very
Greece.
good. Greece. Yes, I wrote Greek. I should have.
Greek is the goat.
Oh,
But it's
it's
Greek.
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 They spelled
It's a
Greek.
Greek.
It's called Greek and it was
It's a
Greece.
greasy goat.
That's what
It's
Greek
a greasy
yogurt
goat.
is.
What?
Try to catch it. Try to catch it.
It's a greasy. Guys, throw it nicely.
Stop.
Air when you said it.
Okay, I'm gonna give part A and part B.
That's a greasy goat.
There were two Jewish groups of leaders that came from the time period of right in between the Greeks and the Romans. There were two of them. Can you tell me one of them, Morgan?
I don't know.
It's one that we talk about a lot in the New Testament in the time of Jesus. And Jesus calls them out a lot and tells them that they are
What
all
ones were
kinds of
the
things.
scribes and?
Remember? No, that's okay. No problem. What were they?
Sadducees and Pharisees.
Good. Said, who were they, Hayden? The Sadducees and the Pharisees. Who were they, Ivy? Good. Sadducees and the, who were they, Asa?
The Sadducees and the Pharisees.
Very good. Toss it. How you chucked it at me?
I didn't. I barely threw it.
Toss it, leave it.
Stop.
Oh.
It was in the air.
No.
Yeah, so Hayden has to.
I'm gonna call it Hayden, okay? Since you answered one already.
I already
Okay.
answered.
A lot of times the ruler of a nation we call a king. But in the case of Rome, do you remember what we call them? They are kings, but they are.
Pharisees.
Oh, you're like in the middle of the word. You're so close. So close. I'm gonna let Ivy finish it off. Caesars. We call them Caesar. Good. Toss it.
That
One
sounds
more.
like a Caesar salad like you like.
Just like it. One more question.
Boom.
Stop.
Oh,
It was in the air.
I want one word
It was this.
that tells me the characteristic of God that means He's in control of all things.
All powerful.
That's a great word. That's not the one I'm looking for. It's the one we talked about. I'll give you another chance. It means that God has complete control over all events in all history.
In control.
Good answer. Still not the word I'm looking for.
If it was one word, it would be in
That
control.
would, yeah, that'd be two words. Levi.
Sovereign.
Sovereign. God is sovereign. Thank you guys. Good job, little people. Grab your stuff.
Wait, do you need the papers?
What papers?
Your time pictures.
Oh no, I forgot my pictures. Okay, real quick. My first
Hi!
people. And I'm not gonna waste all this ink. Come here. All my picture people. Hold up your pictures. Do you have your pictures?
Take it back down.
Okay, this is a
What is
Yeah.
going on?
this is a representation of 400 years, so you can kind of see how long 400 years is. If you lived 50 years ago, you'd still be talking on a corded phone. There's no cell phones 50 years ago. Thank you. If you lived 100 years ago, this is the car you'd be driving. Model T Ford. Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
That's the car Liam wants.
There you go. That's just 100 years. 200 years ago, signing of the Declaration of Independence. Okay, the beginning of the American history, right there. 400 years ago, we've got the first settlement in Jamestown.
Yeah, and you got to drive
You know
that
how
boat.
long that feels ago? That's 400 years. That's a long time. Thank you very much.
Good drive,
This is the car.
I'm the Johnny